Welcome back to We Know Scripted TV, where today we know The Penguin, Season 1, Episode 2. My name is Grace Leeder, but of course, I'm not alone. I'm here with Mike Bloom. Mike, how you doing?
Good. I came away from my cake business, in a manner of speaking, to record this podcast, Grace. I'm a multi-hyphenate in so many ways.
Perfect. You kept trying to tell me that you had a joke about seagulls before we started that you wanted to share. Did you?
That is like a popsicle stick joke. I know that these like street level thugs aren't necessarily the most educated, so I guess they haven't been hanging around the schoolyard to hear all these puns that I've been hearing about since I was like 8 years old.
That to me is a joke that was very effective when I worked in summer camp.
Also, I was a little sad because the Penguin, of course, is usually associated with like want to hear a joke, and
True.
in Batman Returns, and we did not get a version of this time around, though. Probably exacting about as much blood in the form of the punchline to Oz's joke in the van.
Yeah, true. All right, The Penguin, episode 2. I really liked this episode. Thought it was really good. We'll see what you think, Mike Bloom. Before we get started, people should make sure they check out WeKnowScriptedTV.com to make sure you're subscribed to the We Know Scripted TV feed on any of your podcast apps of choice. Check out our YouTube link, subscribe there as well. Get alerts so you find out when there's a new video that dropped, as you can watch these recaps on YouTube as well. Mike, I liked this episode. I thought this was a fun foray. I think after like sort of watching episode 1 and then having to rewatch it and then be like, okay, no, I get it. I feel like I get it. Basically, is my thought after episode 2. This is a very Sophia-focused episode.
Yes.
In a way that I thought was effective. Maybe less so in the Vic and Oz dynamic. There is a little bit of that, but certainly I think pull back on that a little bit.
Takes a back seat.
Which is ironic because Vic is a driver.
Yeah. So I thought this was a good episode. I don't think I was necessarily blown away with it, just because I am wondering if each episode is going to be like the same beats of, oh, Oz has got in a sticky situation. How's he gonna get his way out of it? And like, it was really entertaining this episode, and to watch him come up with the plan and then have to pivot the plan, which is something new that we've seen from him a couple of times over, was fun. We'll see. I guess penguins are slippery by nature, and I'm just wondering, will this become a rote from a certain perspective? Maybe it's just I'm projecting myself too far ahead, because living in the moment, I enjoyed a good amount of it. We have some new characters on the board. There was a little bit of whiplash there with like, oh, okay, Johnny Vitti wasn't the guy in charge. I guess it's this guy Luca now that we're going to have to deal with. And if this show is meant to be the sort of pas de deux between Oz and Sophia, it's a fun place to end the relationship in this episode, where now, if we assume that Sophia was in on the Maronis being the ones to kill Alberto, now she really believes that one person in particular killed Alberto, and she's ready to work alongside Oz.
Yeah, I think that what I liked about this was, I talked about last week that it was like, wasn't that such a bad idea to give Sal the ring? And we do immediately get follow up on that. We don't pretend otherwise. It's like, bro, like, you want me to take the fall for this, in a way that I thought was pretty effective. And I think what's working for me is Oz's sort of penchant for, this episode is called Inside Man, and his he
was inside a man with his knife.
Very much so.
He got to see his insides, man.
Yeah, I like him sort of buddying up to both sides, and last week was sort of him sort of like setting up the situation in itself, and this is the episode in which he's going to he does to a degree also connect with Sal, and then by extension Nadia, Sal's wife, but this is really about him becoming close to Sophia in a way that I thought was pretty effective mostly. And I kind of like him trying to, he's a penguin, but he's trying to weasel his way out of the situation that he's found himself in a way that I thought was effective. I maybe thought that after one episode that the show was mostly going to be like Oz and Vic, and that didn't really, I feel like that wasn't a through line through, like, it's there, this certainly is there, it's like him, the lesson that he's trying to teach him by the end of the episode, like, but it didn't feel as buddy cop, or not buddy cop, but like the buddy duo that I thought we were getting after episode 1. But I still thought
Right.
it worked.
Right, of like the criminal, passing on what was given to him. I mean, that does get talked about. I do think the idea of like, it's a weird phrasing, but generational trauma does apply to the show in many different instances. I mean, these scenes with what's her name, Frances, I think is the name of Oz's mother,
Yeah,
are always so sparse, but such an interesting introspection
I
into
love
his
this scene.
character.
I loved it.
Yeah, where again she has these moments where it's dementia filled. She doesn't know where she is or what she's doing, but then there's these like crisp, clear, sharp notes of lucidity. Where this episode, right, they're dancing, they're having a good time, and then she looks him straight in the face and is basically like, "I don't want my son to be a loser. You know what you need to do." And it's like, yeah, I mean, this guy is a product of his own environment in so many ways. I mean, in Nolan's Batman series, a villain iconically had many different backstories that he juggled between. I think we'll have to
Mhm.
talk about this with Oz as well, as to,
Mhm.
the yarn he spins for Sophia. But even the story that he gives Vic about, Pinchy, if that is to be a true story, about how he was sort of brought in like a Vic as a driver of this one gangster, and then
Yeah.
maybe foreshadowing our death draft, Grace. What happened to that gangster? He got taken out. He got snuffed out because he was a rat. And so the driver then stepped up in his place and was brought in. So we're finding out more about this guy, looking behind in the rearview mirror as he is just hurtling forward like a van being driven by a dead man. As were you surprised that we got the sort of hijacking of the drop shipment in this episode? I had wondered if this was going to be like a big set piece we'd see mid-season. So I was kind of surprised to see it right in the first act of the episode here.
Yeah, I think what I like, I don't know whether when I thought it was coming, we talked about how I kind of felt like last episode, um, it wasn't very clear when it would be happening. Like it kind of seemed like it was for that episode, and then it never gets like I didn't really feel like there was a line of dialogue that's like, and now the drop shipment will happen, next Friday. We
Hmm.
kind of see a message on a phone, and it kind of lingers, and it's a thread. But I feel like they didn't really like set it up well enough. So I don't know what I was
Hmm.
expecting. What I do feel like it's a good example of, in addition to the scene where he goes to the prison to talk to Sal, is for a show that is pretty slowly paced. Like the episodes feel slow, methodical, much like the Batman movie did.
Penguins don't run, Grace.
They waddle. Is that I feel like the pace of plot is actually moving quicker than I might have otherwise thought. I feel like the plot points of the show are moving quicker than it feels like we're going through. Like by the end of these 2 episodes, we do have like Alberto dead. We have the Alberto in the trunk, Sofia finding her, the ring being taken, the drop shipment, the bodyguard being shot this episode. Like it does feel like there are definitely things that are happening on the show that I think the pace of the show would feel like it would be slower than this. So that I take that as a positive of the show,
Yeah.
that through 2 episodes I was like, a lot has happened actually so far, while maintaining this sort of slow, anxious feeling. Like the end of this episode is basically Sophia being like, and Oz being like, okay, let's dance. I want to talk about that and how it relates to his mom and the backstory. I thought that the writing I think has been strong. So yeah, I don't know whether I was expecting it or not expecting it, but I do like that we got it.
No, it's a
The
really
drop
good
shipment.
distinction of plot versus story, where I think the plot, I agree, is clipping along, that we are getting through so much that, like, I would not be surprised if now the whole Alberto thing is not approached until the end of the season, when inevitably Sophia is gonna have her own sort of like Kaiser Soze drop the mug moment. Oh my
Uh-huh.
god, it in Camillo, this is actually Oz that is behind it. But it seems like we're really moving stuff along, and it seems like we've already kind of been planting the seeds, in a manner of speaking, for Johnny VT's fall to come up probably next episode. But yeah, the story itself and the tone of it has a little bit more of a like methodical pace to it, which is interesting because Oz's monologue to Vic in the grave is like, you gotta learn to adapt, you gotta learn to be fast on your feet. But here we are at the end of this episode. Sophia finally says yes to Oz. Okay, let's move into this new drug deal together. So yeah, it's this interesting sort of dichotomy. And listen, I mean, to go back to what you were saying before about the comparisons with the dancing metaphor, I mean, obviously there is the thematics of the idea of a partnership when you are dancing together and the give and take and who leads and who follows. But also, as we find out, Sofia Falcone quite subjugated in society now, whether it's because she is a woman, whether it's because she is criminally insane, whether it's because she's a psychopathic murderer, or perhaps all three. I'm really trying to figure out what they want us to feel about Sophia Grace, because right now they're like, it's almost like they're getting to know us, letting us get to know the person before we inevitably find out like the horrific murder she has committed.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is an extension of what we were talking about last week, which was I asked like, why are we doing this show? And that's not like that's not rhetorical. I'm actually just legitimately asking, and I don't mean that either as like we shouldn't make the show either. I like the show. I'm intrigued by the show, but this idea of following the villain instead of following the hero, and it's funny because I feel like at the end of 2 episodes, Sofia Falcone feels like is almost like, you know, the antagonist of the show, where Oz is the protagonist, but he's the villain, right? So we're like playing with all of this stuff. What they want us to know about Sophia, I think in terms of, interestingly, that she is somebody who's gotten out of Arkham, right? She's been released, and we hear on the news that she was technically what's the right word? She was not found like it actually, there was some reason why she got off. Like she's never been proven guilty, right?
She's
Is that
granted like parole or something.
No, I think it's that she was like not absolved, but it was like they say in the news, right? They're like, the one guy's like, she's a killer, and the guy was like, well, actually, you know, legally, she actually has been like acquitted of her crime, right? Like it's like that's the language they're using, which is that like clearly something happened in some way in which she's actually, it's not like she served her time. If she was serving her time for serial killer murder, you would think that she would be there forever, but she was like let out legally is like the thing. So like I think that actually is like kind of important to think about as we're like, how did that happen? What happened there to get her out of prison? But I do think what we are seeing is, if this is a show that shows sort of like, I feel like I disagree with the word like humanizing. Like these are humans, so yeah, they have, of course they're gonna like eat breakfast and what, you know, they love their mom, you know, like whatever.
I don't know. We haven't seen them eat breakfast yet. We've seen them eat a shit ton of cilantro.
No, so yeah, you might as well shove a So what I think that the show wants to do with Sophia is, even though her story is someone who has come out of prison, we are seeing all of the reasons why she might have ended up doing what she either did or is about to do. Like I think that there might be a difference between what she did before and what she's doing in the future, because seemingly the hangman is she's a serial killer. She's killed 7 women, and so we don't really know. And comic book people who are more like immersed in this might have some understanding, but I really don't, of like, why did she kill these 7 women? Is it related to being part of the Falcone family? Is it like a thing that she is like kind of like a psychopath and doing on her own and did it for some other reason? Is there a reason that we will find out? Like I talk a lot about like in these examples of like, is there more of a Dexter side to this? And I know like things came before Dexter,
Dark
but
Passenger.
Like, right. But is like, are the women she's killing actually women who are like doing worse? Like, were they complicit in something that then she killed? Like, we don't know yet. And then, but what we're seeing, what the story they want to tell us through 2 episodes is, no matter what happened to her in the past, this is a woman who is being undermined, is someone who her own family sees as either too dangerous to be put into position. I feel like that's the confrontation with her cousin and the daughter, right? There's like this, like, I don't know what you're capable of, but also an undermining of like her ability to be able to do something. The only person who did see that was Alberto, who ironically was not killed by her own family, was in fact killed by Oswald Cobb. So
right, but Oz is trying to step in, being like, I see
that's right.
the value in you that Alberto did. Let me be your new partner. And listen, I mean, you know, Oz has probably is the most respectful to women character on this show. I know it's a bit of a low bar.
So far.
I mean, let's connect a bit of the dots here, Grace. Could the several women that Sophia killed, could it be linked to Eve and her workers?
Yeah, so there is this interesting conversation when Eve comes over and she goes into the back room and she's basically saying like, "Hey, like the alibi you wanted, not cool actually. Like you're not
Yeah, to
yeah.
your point, I do love in episode 2 how everyone calls Oz out on his bullshit from
Yeah.
episode 1 of like, "Don't use me as a pawn in your game, dude."
Well, I think that this is to me this is more interesting than like the perfect criminal, right? What I
Mhm.
think is very interesting is that Oz is maybe one day he will become, but I feel like in a lot of these stories we do see that like, Tony Soprano was not like he made mistakes all the time, and it because the nature of the business that you're in, you can't really be perfect at this thing. And so, but Oz is very messy. And so, yeah, Sal being like, dude, this is so obvious what you're trying to do. But like, yeah, if you agree to let us have the drop, then you can like, I'll take fall for Alberto. It's beneficial for him. And then Eve being like, so that thing you were trying to do is basically have an alibi because you killed Alberto. But there does seem to be so there's a couple things that happens between him and Eve this episode, which is
Mhm.
that she does approach him about like not cool that the alibi is for a murder you committed. And she says that it's going to put her girls in it's like putting herself and her girls in danger. And then
Mhm.
in the morning, Oz does pay, but Eve is almost like that's too much money. And so their what their relationship is seems to be not totally like it's not totally defined, I guess is the best way in
Mhm.
terms of like, does he always pay her? Is there an assumption that he will always pay her? Does he sometimes just pay her? Like, so I definitely do think there will end up being a connection with Eve and the girls and potentially what that means for Sophia and whether or not it is like a relationship where there's conflict or it's just like intermingled. I'm almost like hoping it's not just that like Sophia was killing the women who work for Eve. Like I'm
Right,
actually
like
I'm kind of
Jack the Ripper situation.
I'm hoping for something more than that, but that does it definitely could just be that Sophia killed a bunch of the women who work for Eve.
Yeah, I mean,
Certainly.
either way, with that the conversation the two of them have where he's like, "I promise you, we're gonna get out of here. I'm gonna buy you everything you want." It's like, "Oh man, I'm signing your death certificate right now. I don't know when it's happening, but it's happening. I'm so sorry, Eve."
Yeah, I can't remember. Did you take Eve? Did I get Eve? I don't have my notes.
I
Yeah,
think
it's
maybe
okay. One of us took. I think you got Eve with the last pick. I think.
I
I think
think I
that
took
might
Eve
be
with
what
the
happened.
last pick. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think. I mean,
Mhm.
well, I will also say, good tactic on Oz, at least in the moment. Watch he be called out in the next episode for lying that his mother is dead to Sophia. I think you want to cut off as many avenues of people I love as much as possible to the most dangerous person you're connected with, so that they don't threaten you with it. Right?
Yeah.
Like the more you
Mhm.
present yourself as an independent source, the less routes people have to your heart, and therefore the lesser they think they can break you.
Yeah. Just going back to Sophia, I think it is interesting for you to say like, what are they trying to tell us about her? Because it is interesting that she is someone who's come out of prison. And my bet here is like, if I put money on where we're going, is that the reason she was put in jail and not, and then therefore like she's the hangman, she's known as this serial killer, this woman. I think in the conversation with her cousin, where once she realizes that her cousin is uncomfortable with her talking to her daughter,
Mhm.
and the way that Sophia looks back to her cousin, like, come on, like you like, okay, if you want to play it like if you want to think I'm dangerous,
Yeah.
let's do it. To me, that reads like there has to be more to what Sophia went to prison for that would tell us that it's not what people are saying. That's what I think we're coming from because I think this is a I think if you think about why are they interested in Oz Cobb as somebody who were interested. And there is just the thing of like the crime world of Gotham is a pretty fun place to go and explore. But they potentially could have done this with They could have done a political Harvey Dent show. They could have done like I know that he wasn't in the Batman, but like there are
Mhm.
other villains you could have decided to go and. But if you look at Oz, what I think out of the first episode that to me um is the most interesting and where Vic comes into play is this idea of the two people who have disabilities who find this connection with each other and the way in which how they are perceived affects how they maneuver through the world because
Yep.
they are looked down upon, they are dismissed. This is a thing that Oz is even saying in the meetings when he's coming out of like conversations with Luca and Johnny when he's like, "You need anything else? You need anything else, Luca?" And he's like, "No, you've done enough. Like, go home." He's like, "You don't even know the half of what I've done for you, and you think that like what I've done, So it's the way that they're perceived, and then the way they will in this world utilize to their advantage to slide under the radar to be able to make the moves they need to succeed. And I think actually Sophia is on a very similar trajectory. It's just that the thing that she is being looked down upon is because she is a woman, but there's also this other piece of like this dangerous psychopath. And I think we'll find I think we'll find out the reason for what happened with Sophia and why it's not exactly what is being told to us at the moment.
Yeah.
And she will use that, but then ultimately run into the scenario where the two people who've been working together, because they have these very similar ways in which they're maneuvering, which is that they're undermined and feel like they're not getting what they deserve, are going to come head to head in Oz and Sophia because Oz killed Alberto.
Yeah, I think that they're definitely playing with some sort of like cat and mouse game. I think they really want to present Sophia as like the only person in this universe who is as capable of a strategic thinker as Oz is, right? She's the one who says that the Maroni thing doesn't pass the smell test.
Right.
She's the one that nearly gets there, and it takes the work of Oz having to sneak into that basement to take care of the Maroni lieutenant to make sure that he doesn't spill the beans. So I think it's maybe they were just trying to build her up as sort of someone that could prove as a worthy opponent for Oz. And so it makes it only natural that the two partner up together for now. And I also think it's interesting, yeah, because obviously the Batman universe is most well known for its villains. I would say it contains some of the most famous villains in all of pop culture. And so it is interesting, and we talked about this a little bit even with like Todd Phillips' Joker, right? As we're looking upon the precipice of its sequel, which is, putting them at the center, and does it make it more or less interesting when we dimensionalize them and explain who the person is beneath the gimmick. And I liked, what Sophia is bringing in terms of what she represents from her own position within the family, and to your point, how it relates to Oz from both a crime family and a literal family as well, that he has always kind of felt like someone who has been impressed upon and has to impress by proxy. But then at the same time, to, again, where we're not exactly sure why she did what she did, but it is interesting to see sort of like, even within the goons and the bad guys that occupy Gotham, that even they turn their noses up at the Hangman.
Yeah, let's stick with Sophia. There's this dream she has, this nightmare she has, where Dr. Julian Rush is telling her she's safe, she's okay, don't worry. She says she's not safe, she's home, and then she wakes up. She has these like scratch marks on her throat. What do you make of this? What's happening? I mean, to me, this is the way in which she was. The other thing in this episode that comes up is this new drug that they keep talking about.
They keep talking about this new drug. I hope we get to see it soon.
Yeah, which I mentioned is like maybe this is Scarecrow. Let me just make sure. Is the Scarecrow's name
the nerve toxin? Yeah.
What is the Scarecrow's name? What is
Jonathan Crane is his name.
Okay, Julian Rush is the name of the doctor we see in the episode. So just just trying to
no, he's doing something. I don't know. He's doing something weird with this light at the same time.
Yeah, the strobe light, the red light
maybe
moving back and forth.
Hypnotizing, just like lulling you into a sense of calm.
That is where I'm going. Hypnotism, or like hallucinogenic, to the point where Sophia committed murders that she did not know she was committing, or she didn't have the capacity to not commit them. That's where I'm going with like a new drug, a psychologist or a doctor who is telling her she's okay, having come out of prison. This is a nightmare she's having. This is where I go with this, is that the murder she committed were not completely of her own volition, is what I would guess, in terms of a way in which you could say why she's like, this is when the daughter gets pulled away and she's like, oh, you think I'm dangerous? Like, you don't even know. Like, you're
yeah.
And so that's and from her own family too. That's the piece. It's her cousin, right? So that's where my head goes.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think we get a lot of visceral stuff from Sophia. I mean, obviously I know the first is a bit more fantastical, kind of blending fantasy and reality, but we find out that she is sleeping in her closet on the floor. Right. And is scratching at her neck. That to me indicates like a traumatic experience. And listen, Arkham is not exactly the most up-to-date establishment. I've played the Rockstar games before. It's
That's
a bit of
right.
a
Prison abolishment, Mike.
Yes,
That's right.
exactly. Let the criminals out on the streets. It's fine. Look at what Gotham's doing. It's a bit of a derelict affair, and so
Uh-huh.
that's the other question as well, is that the state that Sophia finds herself, the sometimes manic moods that she gets into, is that a product of her being that way prior to her incarceration, or is it due to the effects that Arkham provides, which is to kind of like lock these people away and break them down to their fundamental core?
Well, the other drug related thing that happens at the episode, other than the drop shipment, is the detective. She calls him a drop head, and they give him eye drop drugs. He seems
those are what drops are.
Those are what? Oh, is that a real drug?
So that's what drops are, where you see it in the Batman, like that's the drug in Gotham. Is like
Oh yeah,
they're all
right.
taking it through the eye, which I'll be interested to see if the new drug is in the same method, or if there's, I don't know, some other facial organ that you utilize.
I forgot about the movie. I should have rewatched the movie before we did the podcast. Okay, yeah, he's a drop head. Okay, so that's the other. Yeah, so she gets she bribes the detective who used to be working, and then it takes him almost nothing to be like, okay, fine, I'll. He brings the hospital body right to the funeral, pretty hilariously. But yeah, I think that's, I don't know. This is where I think this is what we've got with Sophia. That I think the backstory here of whatever happened to her, I don't think she did it of her own volition. That's my guess in terms of there. And I presume you would find out who is behind her doing this as well, which might be another way. We talked last week when we did our draft about like who else could show up the board, and that's where I'm like, the Scarecrow makes some sense to me. But it does feel like, because it doesn't feel like, I mean, I guess you could have the world where it was her father for some reason was doing something. That only feels unsatisfying from the realm of he's not around anymore. And then it could be the Maronis, I guess, but that doesn't really. I mean, I think there's enough to like fight against. Like the only way I could see this making sense is that Salvatore Maroni ended up masterminding something where she ends up like committing all these crimes. Is that by the end of this thing, you're gonna have this moment where Maroni's like, "I didn't kill your brother," and so then why are we fighting? Which you could then have the secondary reveal of like, you were behind all this other stuff. I don't know. But to me, it does feel like there's a moment where you could have who is behind all this stuff that Sophia is struggling with. Feels like a question on the board for me so far.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So here we are. We find out a little bit more about the Falcones, Grace, and that Luca is the Falcone. Carmine's brother happens
Uncle
to
Luca. Yeah.
Uncle Luca. Not sure why he wasn't in the first episode. Was he just late? Did he have to take care of affairs out of town?
I mean, I guess it does feel like something they should have set up at the beginning. I'm not totally opposed to it. I feel like this is actually, I feel like there is the potential that while we did get Sophia last week, Sophia's actually the Maroni or the Falcone, sorry, that we want to, and we had Alberto, and we kind of have to set up Carmine to a degree because he's in the movie, and we have Johnny. Like maybe they just felt like one less person to like introduce.
There's only so many slick back Falcones we can introduce in one episode.
I get this. Also, we also get Milos this episode. I think he was in the last week's episode, but he's sort of like becomes a little more important this week as like sort of the brain trust between him, Johnny, and Luca. I don't know. I'm not opposed. I think that like then in terms of the story, I do think moving episode 1 being about Oz and Sophia's like their conflict, how they don't like each other, and then moving into episode 2 and inserting a piece of the equation that can let Oz sort of like slide right up against Sophia. Maybe that's the logic in terms of saving Luca for episode 2, that you can set up in episode 1 them being against each other, and in episode 2 actually Sophia's actually up against Luca, and so Oz can come in and sort of like, sit beside her in a way. I think that that's effective. I mean, I guess you could make the point that he should have been introduced last episode, but I'm not so against it. I don't think I just don't think Luca's that important. If I'm being honest,
that's the thing. I feel like it's only going to be in temporary. I mean, that's the thing as well, is that for me at least, unless we have a big surprise ending, it seems like we are going to be built up as to almost like Better Call Saul style, like how Oz Cobb ends up becoming the big crime kingpin, if you will, of Gotham. So a lot of these people, your Lucas, your VTs, your Miloses, they're filling time basically. They're bags of meat that are occupying space that will otherwise be bodies in that grave soon enough.
I thought we had 10 episodes too. We only have 8 episodes this season, I
Yeah.
think. So, yeah, I think I think we're gonna move through some of these characters pretty quickly in terms of like before the end of the season, Sophia being in charge, then there being like a conflict between Sophia and Oz, and then Oz's eventual triumph. Or as you said, maybe this is in the death draft. Maybe this is not the version where Oz Cobb becomes a criminal mastermind underling, and instead is the fall of Oz this season, but we'll see. I want to talk a little bit. I liked the chase scene. You talked about whether
Yeah.
or not like it was going to be in here. I did think this was like a little bit of the action that I felt like we didn't really get in episode 1. I did like it. I liked the spin on it where like Oz has a plan and then Johnny's like sort of, and this is what he teaches Vic at the end of the episode. I recently there was a TikTok and it was book writing advice. And one of the things they said that people often struggle with in terms of writing their book is, are your themes, is every chapter of your book reinforce the themes of the book that you're trying to tell? I thought it
Ooh,
was
I like
really
that.
interesting writing advice in terms of if you go back to some random chapter in the book that you write or in the show that you're watching, and you can think about it, what is it trying to tell you about the show? Why is it in here? And for me, this is fun because it's action, but I also think it does a good job of reinforcing the theme that Oz is going to tell Vic at the end of the episode, which is that we have to adapt. That Oz is not like this is. I think the crime underworld is not a place people don't have to play by the rules. Like he shoots Alberto. That feels
Yeah.
like that should be a bad thing that he did, but he now has to figure out how to adapt and make that a benefit to him, which is now not framing, but setting up Sal to admit that he killed Alberto, so then that he can create this like divide between the Falcones and the Maronis. So to me, this thing of like, it's not just that it's like a thing that needed to happen because he's agreed to get Sal the drugs on the drug shipment, the drop, but also there's a moment in time where things switch and he has to adapt to that situation where he's actually in the vehicle and almost gets shot, almost dies, and he manages to get out of it. He actually kills one of the Maronis on the way out as a basically to make sure that nobody can like rat him out. Unfortunately, there is someone who gets left alive who could, and he's going to have to adapt to that. But I really liked the chase. It's not a huge action scene, but it's
Nope.
enough in here to like satisfy my little brain that wants action.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good literal representation of the metaphor of shit going south
Right.
temporarily. And we get a little bit of an
Right.
action sting later on as well when,
Right.
again, Oz decides to take out the knife. And I love the swerve on that as well, much like that van where Luca locks down the place and he's standing in line and he, palms the knife because they're searching for weapons and he's next to VT and he starts this fight. And my thought initially was, oh, he's going to plant the knife on
This
VT.
was great. This is great.
Because we know that there was already a plan that was aborted to plant the jewels on VD, and they've already offered, blackmail evidence of VD carrying on an affair with Luca's wife to Nadia. And so it seemed like he would just blame everything on VD, but this is, the short game versus the long game. Instead, it was all planned to get Castillo to pull him off so that he could plant the knife on him, and then he is the fall guy for it. So again, I love this as well, that Oz is surprising us and things are surprising Oz too.
Okay, I will say the knife scene. I was just talking not that long ago with our friend Taryn Armstrong about Rings of Power. And I was saying, I'm really loving the show. I love the show. It's so good. It's so fun. We get these really great scenes. Sometimes I feel like we get to a scene because the writers are like, we got to figure out how to get a scene where this thing happens. This one, they need a scene where they want the fun. I think it's really fun. Once we're in the scene, I'm like, this is great. Ooh, I thought he was going to, try to plant it on Johnny. He doesn't. He plants on the bodyguard. The bodyguard gets shot. It also plays in, again, reinforcing the themes that Sophia's undermined because it's Sophia's bodyguard. She wants to like either get him to admit it or kill him. Like she wants to be the one to do it. And Luca just shoots the bodyguard. And so Sophia feels like she was undermined. again and very publicly in terms of her bodyguard being shot. So the scene is very fun. The logic of the scene, Mike, is that there's only one knife that will be in this scene. Nobody
Yes.
else has a single knife.
None of these gangsters.
None of
Listen,
these mobsters
granted,
have a knife.
it's a funereal affair, like weapons down. We're all gonna have a good time today. Let's loosen the ties up a little bit. We can focus on the crime tomorrow. Today, we honor Alberto.
Okay, but then secondary, if that's true, if a knife, there's no world in which the person who had the knife would have got rid of the knife that they used to kill the bad guy.
Yeah,
So
frankly, I'm surprised that
Oz.
I'm frankly surprised Oz did not get rid of the knife. Like, is it?
But the only reason Oz couldn't get rid of the knife, and if there was some sort of sentimental reason to not get rid of the knife, I like it better. And I can now that's my headcanon, that it's a father, it's a knife that his mom gave him.
Well, that's
as
the
a
thing.
boy.
He's gonna come home and his mom will be like, "Where's your knife?
Where's your knife? You got your knife. You always gotta have your knife." But like the idea that the only reason he doesn't get rid of the knife that we know of is so that he can have a moment where he frames somebody else for having the knife. So it's like, but it wasn't like a thing that he seemingly, when he comes in, it's not like he's like, and they're gonna check for the knives. Like he has to be like, oh shoot, and he palms the knife. So again, I love this episode. I actually think I'm higher on it than you are. Even I thought it was very good. I like the show. I like it. Every once in a while, I'm gonna be fair with my critiques to be like, it's a little. The premise of the scene is silly, even if I thought the scene was amazing.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we are maybe glorifying our main two characters at the expense of maybe some of these high-level gangsters, sometimes having a little too much gullibility. But listen, it was a morose occasion, Luca's nephew died. He's in a sad state of affairs, so he's just we're all looking for the guy who did this.
I know. It's so funny, Mike. I can never tell whether I go back and forth on this. It's like, do I want TV show writers to think I'm dumber than I am or to think I'm smarter than I am? Because essentially all I'm asking for is one scene where someone at the door of the funeral is like, and hey, just remember, no weapons. And then that is like immediately in the scene later, I'm like, well, at least they had the scene earlier was no weapons. But then I'm thinking like the TV viewer is like, surely this viewer does not need me. They're not as dumb as to think that I need them to have a scene where the bodyguard at the door of the funeral is like, no weapons, because it's a funeral, so we don't need to say that. So I can't tell if I need them to think I'm smarter or dumber, Mike. I can't tell.
Oh, that is the enigma, isn't it? That's the everlasting question. I mean, putting ourselves in the heads of TV writers is always a fruitless activity. Those people worked hard, Grice. What did they strike for?
That's true.
To come in and have you question their logic?
That's true. I will say we kind of jumped past just one piece of this that I did really like, Sophia figuring out how that she could get basically a mole who would give up the juice, and we sort of yada yada over this thing about why the guy he's going to be used to Penguin tells him in the guy's lucid state, say it was Johnny who sent you, and this is going to be like proof. But Oz decides when Vic can't get the jewels into, which I wondered couldn't he? I thought what was going to happen is the guy was like, hey, you got a bag. What's the bag? He would drop the bag and then they would be like, oh, the jewels he was trying to steal jewels from Johnny's car, but they were in Johnny's car. And I don't know. I mean, again, this is where I'm maybe the show is smarter, because I actually think the way it turns out is a little, because there's, in one hand, you could see where there's a lot of mess to that of Johnny can be like, well, they weren't in my car. That guy was actually trying to plant in the car, and whether they believe him or not or whatever.
Right. And that's the problem, is that he's not really a trusted source. It's just some random street hooligan.
But if he just drops them and runs and never seems whatever. But yeah, essentially Oz just feels like the plan will not work unless the jewels are in the car and the guy can say Johnny's name. So he's just not going to trust that. He's going to kill the guy and figure out another way to frame Johnny later. I really liked that. I thought it was great.
Well, because that's the thing, is that Oz is trying to really tie two ropes at once, which is the mole with the drop shipment and Sofia still sniffing around who killed Alberto. And so I think he was really trying to get both done in one fell swoop. I think plan A was going to be plant the diamonds in VT's car, and then that way it's oh my God, these were the diamonds that Alberto was going for. VT's holding on to them. Now, why he would bring them to Alberto's funeral, I have no idea, but hey, villains love to monologue, float a little bit, make boneheaded decisions.
I will just say the other plot hole is that if currently they believe that Salvatore Falcone killed Alberto. The way that Oz got the information was from Alberto's phone. So if anybody knew that Alberto had the information about the drop, which they assume he would because he's the head of the family, they could just assume that they looked at his phone and got the information, I guess, right? Couldn't they? Isn't that just a big piece of information? Like we set up the again, I'm like really I'm stabbing and finding holes as much as Oz was stabbing that guy in the bed, which is like the way Oz got the information could have just been how if Sal actually killed Alberto, that's how they got the
Yeah,
information.
if anybody had killed Alberto, yeah, you just go through his phone. Oh, there's a shipment in 2 days. Yeah, I guess we'll sabotage the shipment.
Yeah, yeah. But we wouldn't get the fun inside man storyline, which I actually think is really good. I think it's strong, so it's fine.
Well, maybe it was a matter they sort of talk about how like the specific route, maybe that was the case. Like the Google Cal invite didn't have specific instructions as to the route they were taking.
Okay.
That was inside intel that Oz provided. So
okay, see, love that. And maybe it's in there, and I'm only watching this episode like one time, and then as I'm talking about it, having these like thoughts that maybe they could actually be in the episode. I want to talk about the scene with his mom and the dancing, and then the combo he has with Sofia about grief, essentially. Which it's funny because I think that actually, so he the way he sort of like gets his mom into like out of a moment of like that she had left was to put on this jazz music and play. So my belief is that the story he tells Sofia later about the way that he got his mom sort of out of her
Stupor,
stage of grief is to go listen to jazz music, and so he uses this, and then he tells the story. I kind of do fundamentally disagree with the logic of like just dance your way out of being sad.
Yeah, don't grieve, just dance.
But I think for like a mob world, this is the exact mentality that I would expect them to have, and so the fact that it works on all of them, I think, is totally fine. And so I love the way that like we see the moment he has with his mom, we see the way he tells the story with Sofia. It then takes for him to come to basically the mausoleum later and sit with her, and she sort of tells the story, and then we get the last line, which I love, which is okay, let's dance. Like I thought that was I really loved that. I thought it was like very good.
I think it was I think my takeaway from these first 2 episodes is that really our 2 main characters are far and away the strongest part of the show, and they do such a good job really fleshing them out. I mean, it's interestingly in that mausoleum as well, and maybe speaking towards the isolation that Sofia feels, we find out that her mother died quite some time ago. What's my math here? Like 28 years ago at the time that this is taking place. And so I would imagine that was the case of like, her growing up without like a woman in the house as well, probably made her feel even more alone. But yeah, I mean, Oz knows how to pull at the heartstrings as well, going to a funeral and talking about his dead relatives, always gonna win people over. But yeah, how true do you think that story is? Because I also think from a thematic perspective, him loving jazz music makes so much sense given, again, this is a guy that loves to adapt and come up with plans on the fly.
I think it's true, and what I do like about it is that it takes a little bit of truth. I think that what I really like about this depiction of Oz Cobb so far is that he's actually, there's a likability to him. I think that we've all met people before who like they are rough around the edges, that you have this assumption about them, and like Oz is a criminal, but at the same time, like there is a way about him that is very charming. This is, I think, like the Colin Farrell like peeking through into this character in a way that I think is really effective. I think it's working because like it's a little bit of subversion, I think, on like what works. Like there's a version of like the version of the Penguin I think that I feel like I've seen mostly is not this. It's not the social skill of Oz Cobb that is maneuvering him through the other movies, but in this version it is. It's his ability to connect, and then I presume being very willing to break those connections. He's had a struggle, like not a struggle with it. Like if you're a criminal, like he said multiple times to Vic, like I should kill you. He said it that last episode. He basically suggests all as much this episode, and then tells Vic like, okay, get up out of, like, I'm not going to kill you with these guys. Like, get up, come with me, just learn to adapt. Like Vic seems to be a little bit of like, if there's a fatal flaw to Oswald Cobb so far, it might be this. And I think it comes through with Sofia, where my instinct is that he told her the truth, in which case when things go sour between the two of them, that's a piece of ammunition that she has that could really infuriate, I think, Oz Cobb, and something that would get down deep into him, because it's him. It's like this connection with his mom, um, that he shares, that she could use later, that will, I think, upset Oz, because that was truth. But when you're a criminal, who cares whether, I think it's really good. I love it a lot. I love this, like, social gaming penguin, Mike.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. He's put all his stats in charisma instead of necessarily. I mean, I guess he has like wisdom, maybe not that much like intelligence in terms of book smarts. So he really just rolled a very interesting, different type of penguin than again what we are used to. He's a little bit more, quite literally in this episode, willing to get his hands dirty, and that includes being a kiss ass and also just letting bullshit run out of his mouth and how it becomes circuitous to the point that it actually ends up becoming true at the same time. So it's been very fun to watch him play this game, while also simultaneously a bit anxiety inducing. I know, obviously, in a show called The Penguin, they're not going to kill the penguin in episode 2, but it always gets my heart racing a little bit in these little corners that he puts himself in, of like, how the hell is he going to maneuver his way out of this? And sometimes it's coincidental, sometimes it's thinking on the fly, and sometimes it's, planting a body in a trunk and driving a car errantly onto the premises.
I talked about this too, but earlier today, about Rings of Power. Is one of the things I think that if the relationship between Sophia and Oz comes together too quickly, I think it feels too easy. And I think it is the fact that there have been multiple conversations where Oz tries to patch up something with Sophia, and ultimately it takes him telling this personal story about his mom that sort of softens her up and makes it work. And so it's not the first thing he tries, but it is the thing that sort of is the actual key that works. I think that's very compelling. I think feels more realistic in a superhero show, and is quite good television.
Yeah, I completely agree. So what comes next, Grace? Are we gonna start going into the drug building operation here? Are we going full Breaking Bad right now?
Well, what did we set up from this? Did we really set up? We did, like, unlike last episode where we're kind of like, oh yeah, there's still the drop, there's still this thing. I don't know specific. I guess the biggest thing is probably Johnny's affair coming to light. I feel like is the biggest piece, and a continuation of trying to pin Johnny as the inside man. Because basically, what happens by the end of this episode is that I guess the bodyguard gets linked as the inside man, but he doesn't really feel like. I don't know that we got, like, Sophia feels like she knows who the inside man is. So I think Oz will continue to try to push that. That's where I feel probably where I would put money on, like, what happens next. I do have the episode title if you would like that.
Give it away, give it away, give it away now.
It's loading here as I pull up my episode title. Next week's episode is called Bliss.
Ooh, I mean, I would imagine that's going to be the name of the drug. I think that they're pushing is going to be called Bliss. That's my big call. I think with Johnny, I actually think the whole mole angle has been taken care of. We're not going full Departed and like dedicating an entire season to it. I think more so this is Oz's leverage to just getting into a better spot within the Falcones. Is basically turning VT and Luca against each other by being like, hey, this guy is your underboss. You think he reports to you, but it turns out he's doing some reporting underneath someone in your family, your wife. And so I think his big plan, it's almost like a little House of Cards-y, Grace, especially in those first couple seasons.
Very funny.
Like,
Michael is Michael Kelly not in the House of Cards?
Of trying to basically like work your way up the chain of command. I think that's Oz's big plan. And so I think whether it's going to be, by hook or by crook or by death, he's going to try to get VT out. If Milos is onto it, maybe he's going to get out as well, while also simultaneously working alongside Sophia on this separate operation.
I think there's a theme here too, in terms of, like, if you can pit two people against each other, you can basically take those people out, which is essentially what he's going to do with Johnny and Luca, right? Because you're going to pit those two against each other, and Sophia is going to hopefully pop up in place. The other piece that I think is a thread from this last episode is that Vic is getting a text message from his old crew, the folks that he was stealing the car tires with. So I imagine we're going to get a little bit of a follow-up with Vic's old life.
Yeah, I mean, they talk briefly about where he's from, Crown Point, and, the sex worker says that, like, there's nothing there anymore. I would be intrigued to see if we are going to get a glimpse of Vic's home life, because it basically seems to be non-existent. And we'll see again if this is a show that's themed around sort of generational trauma and strained parent-child relationships. I'd be intrigued to see the parental figures that Vic has in his life, or a lack thereof, and that's where Oz fills in.
I would like more Vic content next week. I think that Vic was I almost think like he was a nice surprise in the first episode, but I was so much more intrigued by the other things that were happening. Then he sort of like feels really not focused on this episode, and then a moment or two here or there. I would like much more Vic next episode would be my
There we go. Turn up the Vic.
ask. Yeah. Turn up the Vic. All right, Mike, we'll be back next week with another Penguin recap. In the meantime, what else you got going on?
Oh, lots of stuff. On the scripted side, of course, always have TV for real going on. Josh and I, after a little bit of a break, did restart our coverage of Lost for first-time viewers. We did a recap this past Friday of season 5. Going to be coming at you with then a quick follow-up with season 6, the final season, finishing up our coverage of Lost and also doing a belated celebration of the 20th anniversary of Lost. And then otherwise, I am on those reality TV streets here. You can find out all the stuff I'm doing. I'm cutting a wide swath through coverage, much like Oz with that knife. So you can check out everything I'm doing at Parade, over on RHAP, or everything in general on social media at a Mike Bloom type.
Okay, very fun. We're also covering Industry here. The finale is Sam is airing right after the Penguin, so should be out by the time you're listening to this. So we'll be covering that. And Rings of Power continues to trek along. Tara and I talking about that. And then the Tastemakers, of course. So check that. Until then, bye-bye. I was going to do like a wah-wah. I'm going to do that. I'm gonna